We are about to begin another episode of the Prosperident webinar series. From their unique perspective as dentistry's embezzlement experts, Prosperident's team brings you information you will not find anywhere else. Now sit back and relax while Prosperident's Amber Weber, Wendy Askins, and David Harris address the issues that are important to you.
We're excited that everybody who's joined us on a regular basis, we're back live, and we wanted to have a special edition of our Prosperident Power Hour. You ask, we answer. So we wanted everybody who's attended and people out in the dental world to submit their questions to us so that we could take the time to go over some important facts with you, our special audience. Back to you, Dave.
All right. Well, it's been a while since we did this, so whoops. We seem to have technical glitches galore tonight. There's the music. I should mention that I'm coming to you today from home and not my office where I usually do that. So when little things are going wrong, that's why. The way it works where I live is if you go out of state, you have to self-isolate for 14 days. So I took my son to college. He's just completed his first week at school, and so I've been now self-isolated for 9 days. So if the background looks a little bit different, that's because I'm at home. Anyway, I wanted to start tonight by just kind of reintroducing us, because it's been a while since we told you about who we are, and we just kind of assume sometimes that everybody knows. I'm David Harris. I'm the CEO of Prosperident. I've been investigating dental embezzlement now for 31 years and a couple of weeks. I'm a CPA, but please don't hold that against me. I'm also a certified fraud examiner and what's called certified in financial forensics. My two co-hosts, who I think of privately as the Texas Tornadoes because they both live in Texas, I should introduce, and I'll start with Amber Weber. Amber spent years as a dental hygienist, and then moved into office management, and then consulting, and then has been with us since 2018. We have 3 levels of examiner here, which are called fraud examiner, senior fraud examiner, and supervising examiner. So Amber was promoted. Actually, we did it here on one of these episodes. To senior examiner. She's our newest senior, but has a whole lot of background. The interview that you heard in the pre-show content, for those of you who tuned in then, was Amber interviewing somebody who'd been an embezzlement victim, and Amber was working with them before she started with us. Anyway, she's a terrific gal. The other thing I'll mention is that this whole webinar series was Amber's idea. And she came to me with it and said, well, people have all this downtime because of COVID, and we should do a webinar. And my response was basically, I don't know if anybody'd be interested in that. And anyway, we did it anyway. We've had over 3,500 people tune into our webinars, and yeah, it was absolutely Amber's brainchild. So that's co-host number 1. Co-host number 2 is Wendy Askins. Wendy is one of our longest serving embezzlement investigators. She started with us, actually, I had to look it up today, in 2012. So 8 plus years for Wendy. Wendy is one of 3 people who hold the title here of supervising examiner. So they are our most senior examiners and tackle some of the really ugly files. Wendy also heads our orthodontic investigation department, and she has a very deep background in orthodontics and really, understands that business like nobody. Tonight we get to have a little surprise for Wendy because we're going to present her with something tonight. One of the things that we recognize at Prosperident is milestones for when people have uncovered a certain amount of embezzlement. And it's my great honor tonight to present Wendy with her $2 million pin. It sort of looks like that. It's a gold pin with the Prosperident logo.
Can I reach through the screen and grab it?
Well, yeah, you can.
Oh, wow, thank you.
Here's the actual pin. It comes in a little box. But, you know, I was worried, Wendy, that if I opened the box, people would think I was going to propose to you or something. So, and I have a wife and she has a husband. So let's just take that off the table now. But anyway, it's a tremendous honor to recognize Wendy's achievement in uncovering the $2 million of embezzlement. And what I have to tell the audience, Wendy, that they probably wouldn't know otherwise, is that the actual embezzlement in those cases was much, much, much higher than that. And all we're counting is what Wendy counted in each case before she stopped. And when you're investigating embezzlement, there's always a point where it just doesn't make sense to keep looking anymore. And that happens actually fairly early in most investigations. And we're going to talk about dental and about insurance coverage for this in a little while. And I think the audience will see exactly what I mean. But, you know, that's the tip of a much bigger iceberg. Anyway, congratulations, Wendy. And it's truly an honor to be working with you.
Thank you so much.
And we'll send you the pin because I'm still in jail here for 5 more days. Normally we try to present those in person, but just not practical right now.
Okay, well, I'm Wendy Askins. Again, thank you so much, Dave. That means so much to me. I'm going to try to compose myself. If you know me in person, you know I'm a crier. So anyway, so today's webinar, you ask and we answer. Our webinar is going to be a little bit longer this evening because we really want to spend time answering your questions in detail. Now, so if this is your first webinar and you're not aware, what we did was we sent a charge out over social media and in the past webinar that we did last month asking, what would you like us to talk about more? What do you want to hear more about? And so lots of people sent in questions and we picked the top 14 to 15 questions. So we're going to be answering those for you today. And we're also going to be answering some live questions at the end. So if you think of anything during this session, please don't hesitate to chat it out to us and we'll be able to answer that for you as well. This webinar will be posted on our Prosperident website and also on the Prosperident YouTube channel. So if you want to hear it again, or please, if you want to share it with your friends, direct them to our website, our YouTube channel, and they'll be able to see it there. They'll be that recording will be available tomorrow. Also, we are offering complimentary continuing education credit, which is like always a great thing. People love that. And that's thanks to our friends at Altura Periodontics. And the email, oh, where'd it go? Oh, there it is. The email with the link to the continuing education credits will be sent after the meeting. I'm excited. Speaking of the $1 Million Club, I'm really excited about our webinar next month. We're going to talk about some elite heavy hitters in dentistry, all aspects of dentistry that have stolen over $1 million from your colleagues. We're also going to change some things up next month. We're going to meet on Thursday instead of our standard Wednesday. We're trying to see if that works out a little bit better for some of our guests, for them to join us live instead of watching the webinar. And we're going to include some new people. You're going to get to meet some of the amazing Prosperident team members as they present their cases. So, like I said before, we get a lot of questions as embezzlement becomes more of a topic of conversation. And honestly, as people are becoming more comfortable in talking about it, even our clients are becoming more comfortable in giving their testimonies or telling about their experience, as you saw with some of the individuals in the beginning before we started the webinar. what we're finding are people just have a whole lot of questions. And during this webinar, we're not able to answer all of them because we get barraged by questions. So we either end up missing them, giving a slight overview of the answer, or we have to return the answer in an email. So this is a wonderful opportunity that we're taking tonight. We're going to slow down, and we're going to be detailed about the top 14 to 15 questions that were sent in to us by your colleagues. Take it away, Amber.
All right, so our first question is a question that we get asked many times, sometimes before we complete an investigation, sometimes if we're not even completing an investigation. And it is easy. I'm going to fire this employee anyway. I also think they might be embezzling. Do I need to wait until after Prosperident finishes? So we did a webinar on this that you can reference to called Breaking Up is Hard to Do. But the simple answer is no. You do not have to have proof or catch someone red-handed to terminate their employment with you. There are some things you need to be aware of, though, that if you're in an at-will state that allows you to terminate an employee, you need to make sure you have reference and there's not legal ramifications such as unemployment, discrimination. But the main thing to remember here is terminating an employee should not make reference to possible embezzlement. So in the past, we've discussed that you need to have documentation and policies and procedures in place that gives you a good foundation for terminating that employee and gives you good reasoning that allows you to terminate them for other causes. We also have a termination checklist available for you, so definitely visit our website or email us or contact us and we can give you some reference for that. But the short answer is no, you do not have to have proof of embezzlement to let someone go that you are willing to let anyone go. Wendy, would you like to add, or Dave, would you like to add to that question?
I wouldn't mind. The thing I tell people about this a lot, Amber, is that stealing is against the law, even if somebody never worked for you. Mm-hmm. So, you know, sometimes people think like if we're investigating that somehow they're going to make our job harder if they let that person go before we get to the end. And in what we do, it really doesn't matter whether you fire whether somebody's still working there when we're investigating or not. So if you're unhappy with them anyway, you know, even if it turned out that they weren't stealing, if they'd still get fired, then just do what Amber said. I mean, do it properly, but there's no need to wait for us.
And I would like to add to that on a story of a case that I recently finished up. The employee was terminated just a few weeks before we got the information. And through conversations with the client, there's been a pattern change since the employee's been gone. So, you know, with new policies and procedures, now the doctor can see the pattern that she had to complete what she had done.
Yeah, good point.
Hey, can I jump into that real quick? We might need to stretch this out to 3 hours. I'm sorry, Amber, I was answering a question when you were talking about that. But one thing that I've seen with some of my clients is that they get ready to fire someone because they have a suspicion that that person is embezzling, but they don't have proof yet. And when they separate with that employee, they'll say something like, well, I suspect you're stealing from me. Or, well, we got some cash missing. I would like to urge our watchers to be extremely careful when you do that. If you're going to fire someone specifically for embezzlement, you better have proof of it. That's why Prosperident has a specific system that you follow and information that we give out. Just watch what you say when you're separating from an employee.
Yeah, good advice. All right, question 2. What can you do if you suspect embezzlement from somebody who's not with you anymore? Is there a statute of limitations? That's a great question. The first thing I'll say is absolutely we can investigate. Personally, I've had to do at least one investigation where I was going back 8 years. Amber and Wendy both know this, but once you start looking more than 3 years in the past, it gets increasingly challenging. You know, some of the records that you need to investigate may not be available anymore, and people's memories are fallible. You know, if you ask somebody, when you were in the dental practice 4 months ago, do you happen to remember how you paid? Most people could probably answer that question. When you ask somebody, okay, when you were in the dental practice on July 2nd, 2015, do you remember how you paid? People aren't going to do it. So it gets more challenging the further back you have to reach, but it can be done. In terms of limitation periods, there are 3 conceivably that you might have to deal with. The first one is insurance. In other words, how in every insurance contract, there's a requirement for you to submit a claim within a certain period of time. And in terms of making a claim against your insurance, and we're going to talk more about insurance coverage that you have for embezzlement later, but in terms of making a claim, you have to follow the contract language in the policy. If you're convicting somebody, if your intent is to have somebody convicted criminally, again, there are limitation periods, and these are set state by state, or if you're in Canada, by the national rules. And if you're suing somebody, again, there's a limitation to when you can do that. Now, having said that, there's this concept called the discovery rule. And what the discovery rule says is the limitation period starts when you become aware of the issue. So let's say, for example, that you're hit by a car. Typically, when you're hit by a car, you know you were hit. So the clock starts ticking at that moment. And in a lot of places, you have, for example, 3 years to bring a lawsuit after you were hit by the car. What the limitation periods are designed to do is provide a limit to the period when you could take action and you chose not to. With embezzlement, it's a little bit different. The discovery might happen years after the crime was committed. So you may have been embezzled by somebody who left you in 2019 and you found out about it yesterday. Well, in that case, the clock starts yesterday, not in 2019. So the door never closes here simply because you were unaware that it happened. It's once you have awareness, that's when your time to act becomes limited. In most states, the criminal statute of limitations is somewhere between 3 and 6 years. And in most places, the civil limitation is usually 6 years, again, from discovery. The one other thing I'll mention about embezzlement that's different than other types of crime is that most crime is a single act. You know, if you get burglarized, somebody comes into your house and they take all your stuff and they're gone within 20 minutes. Embezzlement is a lot more like a dripping faucet than it is like a flash flood. And people will commit embezzlement, you know, on average undetected over about 2 years, but it could stretch to 5 or 6 or 10. On a continuing offense, if the most recent activity is within the limitation period, then every other activity is as well. So somebody starts embezzling from you in 2002 and you fire them in 2018 and you discover it in 2020. As long as you act within the statutory limitation period from discovery in 2020, you can go right back to 2002. In other words, it's not like part of what somebody did is within the limitation period and part of it is outside it. That's not how it works. If the most recent act is within the limitation period, then you can go back to the beginning. So it's not totally straightforward, but this is not the big obstacle to people doing things that they sometimes think it is. You're muted there.
I keep pushing the button, but it's not wanting to work. I'm sorry. So question number 3, what kind of practices external IT advisors do to help protect the owner against embezzlement? So the first key word here we're going to talk about is backup. And what I want to tell everybody listening is your data is like the backbone. It's like the engine of your practice. Everything that we have going on now is all computer-based. Everything is through technology. So think of it as the engine of your practice. So you have to regularly get your oil changed in your engine, and you have to have a professional mechanic help you do things to keep that engine running and make it last a long time, and so you don't lose the power and the usability of that engine. So the number one thing is, when you talk about IT, this is not a DIY, do-it-yourself job. One main thing we talk about is you definitely want to have a backup system, but also have a secondary offsite backup system. So that if that engine in your practice, that data in your computer or your physical hard drive is compromised, you still have something to back up the data and you haven't lost it. The main thing about this, you want that professional advisor and you to be aware that it was carefully thought out and that it's protected and compliant. So once again, a lot of practice owners think that they can complete this on their own, but you really need a professional advisor helping you with this. The other thing we recommend is do an occasional sweep to make sure that everything has been installed and is not installed without authorization. Nowadays, with a lot of people working from home, you know, if you're going to allow remote access, you need to make sure that it's carefully thought out. There's so many different ways to remote access into different systems, and that's why you need that IT professional to make sure that what you're allowing to access that engine, that data of your practice is well thought out and it's been authorized, so that you make sure that somebody without your knowledge didn't install access that you did not want them to have. The third thing that we're seeing now is spam and malware. There's so many ways that people can access your data without your knowledge. And I want you to think of it this way. This is kind of like a silent bank robbery in your practice. If malware gets installed on your computer and people can steal and access your data and you don't have a way to put a stop for it, they don't have to have a gun or a getaway car to complete this. So definitely you want to have an IT department that's making sure you don't have things going into your system that's allowing people who shouldn't have access to that data to install malware and have spam popping up that can compromise that good engine of your practice, your data and your computer system. Do you have anything that you would like to add to that topic, Dave?
Maybe one thing, and we'll just talk about the impact that COVID had. I mean, if you asked me a year ago, who should have remote access to my practice management software, my answer would be practice owners only, no staff. Unfortunately, I'm not sure that's realistic right now, where more people are working from home, and you know that I think remote access for some of your staff, you know, if somebody's doing recall phone calls for you, for example, and booking hygiene appointments, there's really no particular reason they need to do that from your office. So I think we have to adapt a little bit and say, you know, there was a time when we just said remote access to staff is a bad idea. I guess what I'd say now is it has to be judicious. In other words, not every front desk person who normally works from in the office needs remote access. So we still need to control it a lot.
Definitely.
Number 4, what systems should be in place to avoid or eliminate staff from embezzling cash? This is how popular this question is. We've already had 2 people ask about cash right as the webinar began. I'll read one from Carrie, who says, how do you feel about accepting cash? We have a few patients who always pay in cash. Since COVID-19, we use that opportunity to discontinue accepting cash. Now we are getting backlash. Any advice? Well, I'm right there with you, Carrie. You know, I've been in dentistry in some form for about 30 years, and I'm very, very patient, convenience centered. And it's hard for me to say, you know, hey, just don't take cash anymore. There are some areas and some specialties in which that can be handled, and that is appropriate. Specialty wise, I'm talking about orthodontics, for example, where they have the monthly payments and you set them up on an auto monthly, so you don't take cash, it's auto monthly payments. But to be honest with you, there are just some areas or some rural areas in which, depending on the demographics of that area, you have to take cash. So I would recommend try to cut it down as much as possible. And if you can't, then we have some other guidelines for you to follow as well. And also another thing about that is I've heard a few consultants come up with some very calming and creative verbiage and some different solutions, like, you know, asking the patient, you know, to maybe just mail in a check or something like that if they can. I don't know. Anyway, you can check with whatever consultant that you're working with that's really good with words, because I'm really not. Locked cash drawer. I'm always amazed how we take cash and checks and insurance checks and all of the money from our office that we receive, and we just stick it in a drawer beside the person who's posting those payments into the computer system. Actually, the very first orthodontic office that I ever worked in, fresh out of college, the receptionist was busy at the end of the day doing the day sheet and adding everything up, and she finished everything. Of course, we still had patients in the office. She was getting everything all gathered up, and someone came and asked a question, and she got up from the front desk and walked away from it. Now, we had patients floating in and out in front of her desk. So guess what happened when she came back? The entire deposit was gone. So we're not just talking about embezzlement from within your office. We're talking about your patients too. We're also talking about, you know, some people leave money in their drawers overnight. And what a cleaning person could come in there, anybody could come in and take that money out. So we recommend that the funds that you keep, especially cash, you keep it in a locked drawer. Now, this is kind of a passion of mine. Don't play games with the IRS. I have a lot of clients that say to me, well, I take money home, I take the cash home with me because I think it's more secure that way. Well, if you've listened to our webinars before, you know that that's not true. But that's not what we're really addressing with this section. What I'm addressing with this section is when those funds are taken by the business owner. Those are your funds, and you can do whatever you want to with them. However, you need to be cognizant that whatever your staff members see you do, they will do also. For example, I had a case of two partners that were working together, and they had an agreement that when a large paid in full cash patient would come in, which would be around $8,000, that the staff member was told to post that into the computer. That evening, one of those partners would come and back that transaction out, delete it out, and then add an adjustment. And then those two owners would split that money, right? Hey, it's their money. They can do whatever they want to with it. But by them doing that, what they did was they gave their staff member permission to do the exact same thing. And she did, okay? So they taught her how to steal. Secondly, if you're going to take the money home with you, make sure you have a record of what you've signed. I recommend actually signing the day sheet that you've taken possession or you've taken custody of those funds. Because if it ever happens that there is a question about if those funds were deposited, were they not deposited, who took them, and the staff member simply says, oh, well, the doctor takes the cash home. and the doctor or the practice owner can't account for how much cash has gone home with them, then you can't prove it was theft. For example, I had a case of a doctor who was taking cash home with him, and that's fine. I did up a list for him and I said, these are cash deposits that we're missing from your bank. Did you take this money home? And it was like $35,000. And he said, absolutely not. I did not take that much money. I took maybe about 10. And I said, can you show me your records of the cash that you took home? He had no records, and therefore he had no case that theft had occurred. So if you're going to take money home with you, make sure you make a record of it in your office and make sure you deposit it in the bank or make a note to your CPA of the amount, because the IRS frowns on that, right? But no judgment here, but the IRS frowns on it. Okay, go ahead, Dave. Sorry. Balancing staff and reconciliation owner. Okay. Dave and Amber, jump in here with me and help keep me focused, because you know I'm passionate about this. At the end of the day, you got your funds there, your staff member got your funds there, and you got your day sheet there. How do you know that they match? It's your staff member's responsibility on a daily basis. I'm adamant about that. Some people aren't, but I am. On a daily basis, that they take the checks and the cash and the money orders, all physical payments that are there. They look at them, they look at the day sheet, and they make sure that they match, that all the information listed is correct. Then you add up those funds individually, and you make sure that amount balances with the amount that's listed on the day sheet. If there's an error, you correct it, right? So whoever balances, person number one balances, then they sign the day sheet that it's been balanced, and then person number two comes in and balances as well. And it doesn't necessarily have to be about embezzlement or theft. It can be just about correcting errors and finding errors. Like if you've ever worked in an office, you know that one day you check the day sheet and there's like $100,000 posted on a patient's account. You're like, oh, wow, it's an error, right? If your staff's not balancing, or if you're not balancing, you never catch those errors, right? So that's the part that your staff does. Now, reconciliation is also what I'm passionate about. And that's what the owner's responsible for, or the owner is responsible for following up with someone and making sure that it gets done on a monthly basis. That's where you find theft, if it's happening in certain areas. But you want to make sure that you're comparing the data that comes out of your practice management software with what actually went into the bank, right? Comparing what comes out of your software with what's recorded in your QuickBooks? No. Comparing QuickBooks to what goes into the bank? No. These two, practice management software with what actually goes into the bank, right? And Dave is going to talk about float cash and petty cash, just to shut me up.
Well, actually, I wanted to amplify something you said. I have a lot of practice owners who say to me, you know, one of the things I do to protect myself is I make the bank deposit myself. And I say to them, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that, but understand that it gets you no protection. Your protection comes from knowing how much the bank deposit should be and ensuring that that amount of money actually got to the bank. And who carries it to the bank is kind of irrelevant. The question is, did the right amount arrive there? So that requires two things. It requires what Wendy said. You have to start by knowing how much the deposit should be, and then you have to check that that was the amount that was deposited. If you do those two things, as I say, it doesn't really matter who takes the money to the bank. When you're seeing how much money went into the bank, don't rely on a deposit slip, because it's a piece of paper, which means that it can be altered. The only thing that's really valid is to go to online banking and log in and see what the deposit was, and that's unequivocal. In terms of what I'm supposed to be talking about here, which is the the float cash versus petty cash. A lot of practices do something that makes their lives a lot harder. They have one cash drawer, and cash comes in when patients pay it, and cash goes out when, for example, the owner forgets her lunch money and takes $20 out of the cash. And the problem with that, taking the $20 out of the cash, is that then at the end of the day, whoever's balancing the cash has to recognize that that happened and has to sort of make one more calculation to determine that it balances. It's a whole lot easier if you think of two independent amounts of cash. One is float cash, and float cash is what you use to make change when patients come in and pay. So the idea of float cash is it should start the day at the same amount every single day. So if it's $500 in your practice, basically what happens at the end of the day is whoever is balancing the cash counts out $500 and puts it back in the drawer, and everything else, which should add up to what your practice management software says that the cash received today is, those two should line up. The excess over 500 should just go right into the bank. And there should be no further calculation other than looking at, separating out the starting amount of today's float, which is also the starting amount of tomorrow's float, from everything else, and everything else should be what you collected today. Okay, that keeps it really simple and foolproof. The second cash is called petty cash. And what petty cash means is that's what we use when the practice has to pay out something in cash. Somebody sends you a lab case and they, for whatever reason, they didn't pay the courier and you have to pay them. Or, like I say, doctor forgot his lunch money. Or, you found out that, some patient's mother died and you're going to send flowers and you pay in cash. Petty cash is for that stuff, for outgoing cash. And the way that works is it starts at a set amount. Let's say it's $200. Anytime cash goes out of petty cash, it gets replaced by a receipt. And therefore, cash plus receipts always add up to, using my number, $200. When the cash gets low, what the office manager does, because normally it's the office manager who's the custodian of petty cash, what the office manager does is gather up all the receipts, and you write a check in the amount of all those receipts, and that she cashes it and puts that money back into petty cash. And then you're back to $200. If you keep them separate, life gets a lot simpler. I mean, petty cash only needs to be looked at like once a month. Float cash needs to be done every day. Again, the offices that combine them just make a lot of work for themselves.
Yeah. Can I add something to that last topic, Dave?
Yeah, sure.
So into the fact that some offices are still going to be taking cash, one thing that I would recommend offices require as part of your policy and procedure is that receipts be printed off for patients no matter what form of payment they are completing with your practice. So whether you're accepting cash or credit card or check from a patient, you need to make sure that a receipt is printed for every single patient so that it's in your software, in your audit log, in some way to track to see what type of payment was completed and that a receipt has been printed off. In my experience, I've had a lot of staff members say, oh, the patient didn't want the receipt. Still make them print a receipt so that you have a hard physical copy that came through the software and you have that proof that it came through.
It's a good idea. I mean, a smart thief can find a different way to issue receipts than running them through the practice management software, but Amber's right. Let's not make it easy for people.
Right. So our next question number 5, what is the best way to avoid or eliminate time thieves? So this, as people come in and out of your office, a lot of times they will forget to clock in, clock out. So that's one way we'll see it happen. But the key point here we want to make sure everybody understands is when you hire somebody, whether they're salary or hourly, whatever your agreement is, you need to have that documented in writing. Just like a clinical note on a patient, if you didn't write it down, it didn't happen. So I've had some cases with some payroll where people have embezzled money that way, but there was no hard, concrete documentation of what was agreed upon. So just make sure when you hire somebody that you have it in writing what your agreement is with that staff member. And like I said, people will come in and come out. They may forget to clock in and clock out using your technology. One of the great new things that technology offers us now is a biometric reader, and that's where they just put their fingerprint right when they arrive, and then they use their fingerprint as they leave. It's really hard for somebody else to change their time for them because it goes off of their fingerprint. So that's the great thing about it. And these readers are really affordable now. They used to be pretty expensive, but if you really research a biometric reader, you'll see that they're very affordable. And that's one way to better safeguard yourself. The other thing is for those people who forget to clock in, forget to clock out, forget to use the software for their lunch break, is really make sure that not everybody can go in and change their time, that's limited. Either yourself or your office manager. It's really hard for somebody to just go in and change their time, and there has to be some accountability that they go to that person and say, hey, I didn't clock in, I didn't clock out, can you help me with that? So it allows you to have some accountability. Now, most offices are going to pay, you're going to pay your staff every 2 weeks, bi-weekly or twice a month, whatever your policy is. But, you know, that's a lot of hours and a lot of moving parts. So one thing we definitely recommend as a practice owner, at the end of the week, part of your weekly closing duty, review those hours and make sure you approve the hours that have happened for the week, so that when payroll comes around, when payday comes around, you don't have a stack of time to review, and you don't have people just saying, oh yeah, that was right, that was right. So you don't have to think back so far. So start approving your time at the end of every week for your staff members. Then if you're using a third-party provider to do your payroll, you want to make sure that you have a review of all those time entries and how that's being completed. You need to review your payroll system against time entries or salary. So like I said, if you're using a third-party provider, you want to make sure that what was completed on your biometric reader, your software, that it matches what the report that you get from your CPA or somebody else who's completing your payroll. A new question here too with our COVID-based work changes, how we were talking about people are remoting and working from home. The salary makes sense. Some people want to be put on a salary rather than have this hourly time clock, but you still need to track it and monitor it and make sure that it's being completed in a written standard procedure that makes sense for you and the team member.
And kind of a follow-up question to this, if somebody is stealing through payroll or possibly bonus manipulation, what do you need to prove that they committed fraud? And the answer I normally give people is this: we need one of two things, documentation or deception. Documentation is what Amber talked about a minute ago. If we're going to accuse somebody of payroll fraud, we need to be able to prove either that they took more money than their contract permitted, or deception, which I'll talk about in a minute. We run into a lot of cases, and Amber, you've done a couple of payroll cases recently. We've run into a lot of cases where, you know, what the employee is supposed to be paid can't be proven. Maybe there's no written employment contract, or maybe there was one 10 years ago, you know, but they've gotten 6 pay raises since then. It doesn't necessarily have to be a formal contract, you know, that's 12 pages long and signed in blood. You know, an exchange of emails would even do it. You know, I agreed to raise your salary from $17 an hour to $18.25 an hour. Would be enough to establish what somebody should have been paid. But the basic problem you get into is if you can't prove what they should have been paid, and let's say this is the person who's preparing the payroll for you, then you have a problem. Our legal system just does not send people to jail for your word against theirs. We've all watched cop and lawyer shows on TV, and we all understand that the threshold, the standard of proof for a criminal conviction is proof beyond a reasonable doubt. And mathematically, that equates to like 90% certainty. So if the employee swears that they were, you know, that the agreement with the employer was that they were going to be paid $21 an hour, and the doctor swears that the amount was $18, nobody's going to go to jail over that, because it's going to be one credible witness against another, and our justice system just will not convict on that basis. The other issue, and Amber kind of touched on this as well, is that in a lot of offices, the office manager does the payroll with no oversight whatsoever from the doctor. In other words, the doctor doesn't get the reports from the payroll company and, eyeball them and check them. For salaried employees, check them against the salary. For time-based employees, to look at the time entries and so on. As soon as you turn your back on this one totally, you open the door to the person preparing the payroll giving themselves a raise, giving their two teachers' pets raises. You can't abdicate out of this. The other thing that sometimes saves us, though, in a case of payroll fraud, is deception. So when the employee deceives the employer about what's going on, that takes away the argument that I was entitled to this money. Mindy Salzman, who's one of our senior examiners, recently did a case, and it was a practice where what the office manager was doing was overpaying themselves. The way that the payroll company calculated the pay was that the office manager sent the payroll company a spreadsheet each pay period. What the office manager was doing here was sending one spreadsheet to the payroll company, and then a different version of the spreadsheet with their compensation lower to the practice owner. Okay, in that case, we're okay without any documentation. I mean, nobody would do that unless they're stealing. So, as I say, we're back to documentation or deception. Anything to add there, Texas Tornadoes?
I'd like to ask, I know it's true.
Wait a minute, you don't get to ask questions. We're here to answer them.
Hey, I know it's true for me that I've seen a lot of payroll and bonus manipulation cases lately. And I know Amber's had, has Prosperident as a firm in general seen an increase in that? It seems like we used to never have payroll cases. Now they're everywhere.
It's true, Wendy, and I've noticed the same thing. And it's, I haven't studied it, so I don't have any statistics to give you. But yeah, certainly this year, and maybe it's a little bit related to COVID in a couple of different possible ways. But yeah, we've been seeing a lot more of that. I agree with you.
Yeah, they're kind of one of the harder ones. Me as an investigator, I'll say payroll cases are a little bit harder to do or to prove beyond a reasonable doubt, simply because the documentation is hardly ever there.
Yeah, if somebody's got good documentation, this is easy. It's a slam dunk. If the employment agreement, which is up to date, says that the office manager's pay is $18, and we go to the payroll company and we see that she raised her pay from $18 to $21, it's a slam dunk. The problem is that, and I think you see 3 nodding heads in front of you, ladies and gentlemen, we all agree that practices do a piss poor job of documenting somehow how employees are supposed to be paid.
And even bonuses.
Yeah, bonuses.
Yeah,
and we see a lot of bonus calculations manipulated. So you've all got HR advisors. They can help you with this.
Yeah. Can I add one thing to that, Dave?
Yep.
I've seen a lot of issues with bonuses where it's specific to like just your office manager or just this. So that just opens one more area that you really have to look at. And also same with like holidays and paid time off. In a case that I had recently, rather than certain people getting 8 hours of a paid holiday, they racked on a couple more hours of holidays. So it's not just about the clocking in and the clocking out. You have to look at all the logistics and really look at those timesheets and make sure that everything is that's part of your policy is being completed accurately.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's a great point, Amber. Number 7, would you recommend dentists acting together to form a database to register these embezzlement offenders to protect others from them? I have excellent news. We've already done that for you. If you will go to the Prosperident website, we have the Hall of Shame, which not only includes cases that were done by Prosperident, but cases that have just been publicly published all over the United States. Do we have other countries, Dave?
You bet we do.
In there? Okay. I usually just look for Texas. No, I'm just kidding. Anyway, so from all over the world, and you can break it down by state, city, whatever you want to break it down by, you can do that. One thing that I do have a little bit of concern about is, on its face, this question sounds a bit crazy, to be honest, but I understand where the person that asked this question is coming from. I had a case where one doctor got embezzled for several $100,000. We released the suspect, and she hounded him so much so that he had to have a restraining order taken out against her. And then 2 months later, he found out she was working for an orthodontist down the street who had just graduated from school and passed his boards, and it was his first shingle he was hanging out. Oh. And he hired her to set up his practice because she had so much experience at Doctor's so-and-so's office. And he called me, and we had a long discussion about it, and it broke my heart. And he said, Wendy, she will break him before he ever even has a chance to be successful. I can't let this happen. What are you going to do? I mean, the young doctor didn't call for a reference. My client can't go to him and say, hey, fire her. Do you know what she's done? So I did give him some advice that kind of a mob gangster would probably do, but I'm not going to share that because my boss probably would not like that.
Because you're a lady.
Because I'm a lady. Anyway, yeah. So I understand where this is coming from, but keep in mind that what you say about someone, a former employee, to another professional in public, out loud, and someone overhears that, that can be held against you as slander, right? So remember that. So don't go writing names, keeping a private database, because you can get in trouble for that. Anyway, I'm belaboring the point. I apologize. So if you happen to have a picture or a public printing, now that's the issue that we deal with at Prosperident. Every person that you will see on the Hall of Shame is from a public, either charged or convicted embezzler. That's the important thing. They have to be legally charged or legally convicted. Okay? If you know of one that you would like to share with us, or maybe that you would like us to check out for you, send us an email and we can help you with that. And I'm going to go a little Texas on you now. I think the reason that a lot of doctors don't call for references from their employees is, number one, they're just too busy. Number two, they just don't want to take the time because they're too busy. And number three, they might be a little bit embarrassed. They don't want the other doctor to think they're poaching on their employee, or, maybe they're afraid of what they're going to hear. Listen, please make the damn reference call. Please. You don't need a database. You don't need the Prosperident Hall of Shame if you'll make the damn call to former employers and ask, would you rehire this employee? Right? A lot of people can save themselves a lot of trouble and a lot of pain if they would just pick up the phone. All right, I'll get off my soapbox. I'm sorry for the cursing.
The problem I have with this concept, as Wendy says, first of all, it's people trying to avoid making that call that we all know has to be made. Beyond that, if doctors set up their own database like this, you get into murky legal ground very quickly. I mean, our Hall of Shame is extensively researched. We have a very detailed policy on when we put somebody on there, and we have an equally detailed policy on when we remove somebody, because there are certain circumstances where we'll remove somebody. You know, like after they're deceased, for example. When people start doing this on their own without those safeguards, you know, it's just a slander case waiting to happen. So, you know, just use ours. As Wendy said, if you have somebody that you think should be there, let us know, and we'll research them the way we research everybody else, and be happy to add them if they're in the zone. Okay, so a lot of you practice as solo practitioners. Some of you are in a group practice or a multi-office practice, or maybe even a DSO. For those of you who don't know, DSO is Dental Service Organization, so that's kind of a dental chain if you want to think of it that way. So Heartland or Aspen Dental, or in Canada, 123 Dentist or somebody like that. They're examples of DSOs. And the question is, well, if I'm in that situation, how do I handle this problem? And the first thing I'll say is, if you own 5 offices, your life gets a lot easier if all 5 use the same practice management software. Now, that's easy if the way that those practices got there was you started them each from scratch. It's a little bit tougher if the way that you're growing is by buying practices, because when you buy a practice, of course, it has whatever software it has. My suggestion to you, if you buy practices, is that you plan from the time before you purchase to convert that practice to another software. That doesn't mean you have to do it on the day you sign the check, but there needs to be a plan, and I would say within 6 to 9 months after acquisition, you really need to be on common software. If you have diverse software, a couple of things happen. The first is that you can't have any kind of consolidation routine. So, you know, you have information from each office, and one of the things you want to know if you own 5 offices is, well, you know, what was our collective revenue this month? If you're using disparate pieces of practice management software, then, you know, somebody's got to sit there with a spreadsheet and add stuff up. Whereas you really want to be able to automate that consolidation. The second suggestion that we'll make is that if you have 5 offices, each one should have its own bank account. It doesn't mean that you have to pay payroll from 5 different accounts. I mean, you can have a head office account that does disbursements. But for deposits, it's a whole lot easier if each practice puts its money into its own account. And then, you know, you can consolidate all that money, and the banks will do this for you. You know, you can consolidate it all into a central account, but flow it through an individual account. If you have one bank account that 20 different practices are depositing to, I mean, there's no way to know if that balanced or not. You would need a team of accountants to figure that out. If you have one office that has one set of reports and one bank account, it gets a whole lot simpler. The other thing is, you really need, when you get to a certain size, what I'll call a reconciliation department. So this is some bookkeepers typically at head office, and their job is to review the reports from each individual practice and make sure that everything adds up to the way it's supposed to. You might recall from our previous presentations that we kind of see 2 kinds of embezzlement. We see embezzlement that happens when reconciliation doesn't go on. In other words, where somebody steals money out of the deposit, it's easy to do because they don't have to do anything in the practice management software. So if you have 5 practices and each one is reconciling individually and nobody's looking over anybody's shoulder, you're vulnerable to that. if reconciliation is done, stealing can still happen, but now it requires cooking the books. It requires playing games with practice management software, which is a little more complicated. And right to my next point, the reconciliation department at head office needs direct access to each individual software. In other words, it should not be like each practice prints off reports and emails them to head office. The people in reconciliation should generate their own reports, first of all, and secondly, they should have wide open access to software. In other words, they should be able to say, well, you know, the receivables at this practice look a little bit out of whack. Let's start looking at individual patient ledgers to see what might be going on there. Okay, we can't have sort of a firewall between the people doing the reconciliation and the people in each individual practice. So if you have a multiple office kind of structure, these are the things you need to start thinking about. One of Amber's jobs with us is to help people set up their systems in a way that's protective. And we have a product specifically designed for multiple practice offices. Amber, I don't know if there's anything you want to embellish here.
Yeah, the other thing I'd like to add is even if you are going to have a separate account for each location, I would also recommend if you are doing insurance electronically, like direct deposit, that be its own separate account as well. So there's a lot of moving parts to that, but like you're saying, Dave, the main thing is each location needs to be reconcilable and be able to monitor on a daily, weekly, monthly basis.
Absolutely. Thanks, Amber.
You know,
Yeah.
Can we go back to that for 1 second?
Yeah.
Another thing about that is that if you're going to try to measure profitability by location, because I work with orthodontists and a lot of them have most of them have multi locations. How do you measure the profitability of one location versus the other location to see where your resources need to be allocated if everything is just going into one bank account and expenses are written out? I mean, you know, you can pull out collection, you can pull out production, and you can pull out collection individually out of the software, but you can't generate a P&L with expenses on that if you've got it all, your expenses all mingled. So it's another
I'll give a slightly different viewpoint there. I mean, you can, but it means that your accounting system needs to have, you know, 8 different revenue accounts being revenue for each individual branch of your practice, and you need to allocate it. I mean, you can do it, Wendy, but you know, it gets a lot simpler if you can have a bank account that is tied to a location and you can see how much money goes through that account. That makes the profitability picture a whole lot simpler.
Yeah.
I'm all for simple. Number 9, how does someone know that they are being embezzled when everything looks normal? Well, the first question is, what exactly is normal? Every practice is different, although they may have similar characteristics, they're different. And what exactly are you looking at? You know, it's the goal of every embezzler to make whatever it is you're looking at look normal. I've worked on several cases in which if you didn't have the skills to know what to look for, then you would think everything was normal. I mean, I worked on a case of someone who was just stealing money out of the deposit, to be honest with you. Just pure, simple simple theft out of the deposit. But yet when I reconciled the practice management software to the bank statement, it matched perfectly. So if I didn't know exactly what to look for, then I wouldn't have known. So it's easy to embezzle and make everything look normal. Another thing that you need to remember, and I can tell you this is true 100% from the deepest bottom of my heart, every embezzlement leaves a trail. It leaves a trail. It depends on if it's where you're looking or where you're not looking. And remember, Prosperity always talks about the behaviors. That's because the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners prints out a report to the nations every single year. And as a certified fraud examiner, I read it every single year, and every single year it always says the same thing about, in over 90% of the cases that were reported of fraud and embezzlement around the world in every different type of industry, not just dentistry, not just medical, not just insurance, every industry. Over 90% of those thieves exhibited somewhere between 1 and 3 behavioral characteristics that we always talk about at Prosperident, and we have the embezzlement risk assessment questionnaire for that purpose. So I'm going to backtrack a little bit, and I'm going to say, let's throw out the concept of what looks normal financially with our records, and let's start looking at what looks normal or abnormal with our behaviors or our employees' behaviors. Is there anything you want to add to that?
I'll just kind of echo. I get a lot of calls from people, or a lot of people will say to me, when I'm speaking at a conference, there's no way I'm being embezzled because my deposit equals my day sheet every day.
Mm-hmm.
And I always tell people there are 2 ways to embezzle. There's reconciliation theft, and if you're not doing that comparison, then I can steal from the deposit. I don't, I simply allow the deposit to be a different number than what the reports say it should be. Or if you do that reconciliation and I still want to steal, and I will, then what I need to do is teach your software how to do it. And I'm not going to get into a description of how that happens here because we don't do that in public. But if you're a practice owner and you have questions, reach out to us, and we're more than happy to have the discussion. We see a lot of reconciliation theft because there are a lot of practices where the doctor doesn't ever look at the amount that should go into the bank. And we also see probably an equal amount of kind of concealment type theft where somebody's cooking the software.
Yep. Well, one thing I want to add to that too, Dave, is going back to the behavioral part of it, is when you ask a question, what's their behavior? How do they want to answer that question? And it can go from a very simple question like, what's going on with this insurance? Why didn't it cover? So those are some things to just keep note of too. How are certain people, that everything may appear normal, but when you start asking hard, detailed, specific questions, what type of response are you getting on a regular basis?
Amber, you said words to me a little while ago that I'm going to bring back because I thought they were so profound. What Amber said to me is, one thing to really watch out for, I think the words you used, Amber, were a lack of transparency.
Yeah.
You ask somebody a question and you get an obfuscatory answer.
Mm-hmm.
They give you the 3-minute answer to the 30-second question.
Right.
They sort of try, through the middle of the answer to make you forget the question. So I'll just bring those words back because I thought that was a really good way of putting it.
Yeah.
Okay, we got to get going or we'll never get finished these. Number 10, what about cameras in my practice? A couple of things I'll say here. First of all, you're in the realm of governed by state law. So most states allow you to put cameras in your practice if you want to record video. The obvious exception is private areas. So we're talking about a restroom, or in a lot of states, a break room is considered a private area. The question is, can we have hidden cameras? In general, no. Almost every state requires, if video surveillance is being used, that the people under surveillance be aware of it. So that means that you have to tell your staff, and also that you need to, have the sign on the front door so that when the patients come in, they know that they too are under video surveillance. Now, here's the interesting part. It is much easier to record video than audio. And when you record audio, you fall under wiretapping, or sometimes called eavesdropping laws. And here's how it works. In 39 states, they're called one-party states. So what that means is that one party to the conversation can consent to the recording. In the other 11 states, they are known as all-party states, and that requires every single person who's involved in a conversation to consent. So let's consider a couple of scenarios. You put a camera that records video and audio in your private office, and presumably whatever it's recording is conversations between you and somebody else. So that's okay, because you're a party to the conversation and clearly you consent. The second scenario is you put a camera over the front desk that records audio and video. Now that's not okay unless the staff member specifically, who's there at the time, specifically consents. And realistically, that's not going to happen. So what I tell people is, if you have video, normally you need to have the audio part not recorded. You can capture video without audio. If somebody external to the practice, like for example, your alarm monitoring company has access to this, then you need to consider HIPAA issues, because the images of patients are protected under HIPAA. And I will say this, even if it happens to be legal in your state to have hidden cameras, it's a really bad idea. You know, it's not like you see in the Tom Cruise movies where, you know, the camera's the size of, you know, a dime. Permanently mounted cameras need infrastructure. So they need a power source. They need to have a way to upload the video to a computer somewhere. Okay, these are a little bulkier than perhaps your mental picture is. And if you put those in your practice, sooner or later, one of your employees is going to find them. And just imagine the trust issues that happen when they find them. And the final point is this. Wendy, I'll put you on the spot. How often in your lengthy career with us have you seen embezzlement captured on camera?
I think I've had several cases where they've submitted the video of it, but it's not sharp enough to tell exactly what the person is doing. Are they forging a check, or are they writing out their grocery list?
Yeah. I've been at this 31 years. I've seen somebody caught 3 times. So the other problem with cameras is this. If you have an office that's open 35 hours a week and you have 2 cameras covering your front desk, congratulations, you're now shooting 70 hours of video every week. Just going to ask you a really simple question. When are you going to watch it? So cameras are a murky area. I mean, yes, you can do it. And I think personally cameras have other uses and practices. If I were a male dentist treating female patients, for example, I'd probably want a camera in the operative. Because if somebody ever claims that I gave them some nitrous and then groped them, I'm going to be able to show where my hands went and that they never went below the bib. So I think cameras serve other purposes. Also, you know, they're a good protection at the front desk. I mean, there are people who will come into your office, and if they don't see anybody at the front desk, they'll walk away with the monitor that's there. They're great for that kind of stuff. For embezzlement, pretty close to useless.
What insurance covers me if I am embezzled? How do I claim? Okay, I love talking about insurance, embezzlement or theft insurance. What everyone doesn't always realize is that you probably most likely do have a theft indemnity clause within the insurance that you have right now with the insurance policy. It's generally called employee dishonesty insurance, and it's generally under property theft, somewhere in there. The typical coverage is around $25,000. If I were you, my recommendation would be to increase that to a minimum of 75, if not 100, because when it happens, it will be that much when you find it, most likely. So it'll cost you a couple of extra couple extra bucks to increase it for your own safety and peace of mind. Another issue that we work with at Prosperident is filing insurance claims or helping our clients file insurance claims. This can be quite difficult to do, or let me rephrase that. It's not necessarily difficult, it's that the amount of information and the type of information that the insurance company requires is just flat out ridiculous, to be honest with you. It's ridiculous. But they do have a list of certain things that are required. And we've actually had a question that says, how do you claim from insurance if your receptionist has pocketed cash from patients without getting the patients involved? It is my cardinal rule as an investigator, and I know with Amber and probably the rest of our examiners as well, if I can do whatever I can do or have to do to keep this information out of the hands of my clients' patients, then that's what I'm going to do. So to answer your question, if you can track the transactions through your practice management software, and there are ways to do that specifically, I don't want to discuss here, of course, in this public forum, but if you'll send me an email or you want to give me a shout on the phone, then we can talk about that. There are definitely ways to do it in which you don't have to advise your patients depending on how the money was stolen. Anyway, so you generally have to have a claim. When you're filing an insurance, you have to have a proof of loss form, which has to be completed, a narrative about the loss, a master list of losses, and your proof of loss form, of course, has to be notarized. And there are some other highly sensitive areas in there that you have to navigate through. But yes, you do have an employee dishonesty insurance coverage. I bet you if you get your policy out and look at it, you'll find it. That's it for me.
Okay.
Oh, you want to cover that, Dave? Sorry. Go ahead, Dave. Oh, or not.
All right. Oh yeah, we'll just talk about bonding for a second. So bonding is another way of getting insurance coverage. When your employees are bonded, it tends to have a much higher limit. It's also much more expensive. But what the bonding company will do is actually look at each of your employees, do background check to determine whether or not they're bondable. So that's another option that I'll mention, to have a conversation with your insurance agent about as a way of covering yourself with that. That's all I had.
All right, question number 12. What are 3 things I should do each month to protect myself? And this is something I'm passionate about with our office protection system. I always tell my clients with office protection system, the difference is in the details. So the first thing we talked about is reconcile. So this is where you use your practice management software and you look against your bank statements, merchant accounts, like who you do your credit card payments through, and third-party accounts, credit, anything like that. Like we mentioned earlier, just looking at your QuickBooks versus your bank is not really going to give you those difference in the details with your practice management software to make sure that middle ground is met. This is definitely something, that if you want to, it can be outsourced, like Dave talked about with DSOs, but you need to make sure that they have access to the reports and the information to do a true reconciliation from your practice management software. The second thing is review your entry logs for your alarm system. Who's come in? The day's been closed, the week's been closed. Has anybody come in after hours and logged into your system and changed stuff to be able to change things after you think everything matches and those details are clear and concise? As we talked about earlier, also, if you're doing remote access, you also want to be able to look at who logged into the system after hours, after a day was closed, and have the ability to change that as well. And the second one is reports. We talked about your bank deposit can match the bank report, the deposit slipped off of the software can match your banking, but You need to make sure you know how to pull all of the true reports that let you see those details. Any modified transactions, adjustments, anything that was deleted that maybe should have went to your bank, your accounts receivable, what's happening with patient balances, is that being monitored and tracked correctly? So like I said, it's the differences in the details. So if you want to protect yourself, make sure you're looking at reconciliation, review, and know your software and know your reports. Moving on to our next question, how does a practice get long-term embezzlement protection, and what are costs involved? How long does it take, and can it be done remotely? We do offer Office Protection System. We can access this remotely. And what we do is we look at 25 key points in your software, in your practice, and in your banking. And we look for any areas of vulnerability or areas that we want to help you get good policy and procedures in to help you have some financial integrity and safety. The typical cost for a solo practice is $7,000. It usually takes about 6 to 8 weeks to be completed. The main thing here, though, is as a practice owner, in order for you to be protected and safeguarded, you have to be involved for this change in implementation. We work with you to help teach you what areas you need to focus on, but that's the real main thing, is you have to be involved in implementing that change within the practice.
All right. Question we got that I think was a great one. When Prosperident is working with a doctor, how does their privacy get protected, and also that of their patients? The way we protect you is very simple. When we're doing an investigation, it is stealthy. We go to great lengths to make sure that your staff have no idea that you're taking a look at the practice. And that's important whether embezzlement is happening or not. If it's not happening, you don't want to go to your staff and say, you know what, I didn't trust you for a minute or two, so I had an audit done, but don't worry, you did fine. You know, that'll make staff meetings frosty for the next decade or so. And if something is happening, we don't want the thief to see that they're about to get caught, because they may do something really desperate, you know, kind of the embezzlement equivalent of a Hail Mary pass to try to protect themselves. In terms of patient privacy, we have wide open access to your software. So we sign what's called a business associate agreement, and that's a privacy document that keeps you compliant under HIPAA when sharing information with us. The other thing I'll say, because you know, people ask me sometimes, well, when I give you my data, is it safe? And I'm just going to send a shout out here to our IT guys, and we have two really brilliant guys who run our IT department. Jake Hiltz is our Chief Information Officer, and Seamus Leonard is his deputy. And the links that those guys have gone to make our data secure are unbelievable. For example, our server's not in our head office. Our servers are offsite in a separate server building. And here's how secretive those guys are. I don't know where it is. I've never been there. I have a general idea, like within about an 8-block radius, but I have no need to know where that stuff is. So yeah, these guys take the privacy very seriously. So when people ask me this question, I kind of laugh and say, well, you know, realistically, our stuff is about 30 times as secure in our hands as it is in yours. And usually when I say that, the client says, okay, I'm feeling better about that. I guess we're out of questions. Why don't we do the wrap-up slides, guys, and then we'll just tackle. I've got one question that came into me, and there may be a couple more that we want to tackle, time permitting, as well. So let's just keep going here, and then we'll turn the slides off and answer the questions.
Okay, so we are Prosperident, and I hope Dave, Amber, and myself represent our company well, although we are a bit goofy, I realize, and we have fun together. But, you know, we are the largest dental embezzlement firm in the world. That's all we do. We specialize in that. We have investigators all over the United States and Canada. So we are really a serious business, and we take what we do very, very seriously. We specialize in embezzlement investigations for dental practices and dental specialists. And we provide our office protection system, which Amber went over, which is a 25-point review of the policies and procedures within your office to help guard against embezzlement. We also provide litigation support and expert testimony for those individuals that need that.
A few resources that we'll talk about. The first one is us. If you have a question, if there's something you want to talk about, we'll put our contact information up in an upcoming slide. Feel free to reach out to us, and we're always happy to have that conversation with somebody who says, this is what I'm concerned about, or this is what I'd like to do, or I'm buying a practice and what do I need to worry about there. And we love to have those conversations. The second thing I'm going to mention is that until September 30th, if you want us to help you with your systems, then that's the Office Protection System product that each of Amber and Wendy have mentioned in the last couple of minutes. Contact us, and we are right now offering something we've never done before. There's 10% off for folks who want to go ahead until September 30th. The other thing I'll mention, if COVID has taken a bit of a bite out of your cash flow, and when I say if there, I really mean because, we're allowing people to finance our products, so we give payment terms to make them affordable, and that's still on. And the final thing is, if you like what we do, we would love you forever if you left us a Google review. You can do that by going to that page, prosperident.com/review us, and we'll take you right to the Google review page, so you don't have to hunt around to find it or anything like that. We really don't ask for anything in these webinars at all. It's really about giving rather than receiving. But if you like us, as I say, we love you forever. That's our story. There's some of our team. You can see that I'm in the middle, and the Texas tornadoes are at the ends like bookends. Let's stop the share though, and we'll put ourselves on the big screen there. Now you've got all of us, and we'll tackle maybe a few questions. I see we're very close to time, so we might have time for two. The one question that I got is this. Somebody said there are some insurance companies that pay by kind of putting money on a credit card. And what we do is we take that credit card and we run it through our merchant machine. I'm going to say a couple of things about this. I'm going to say really expensive way to get paid, because now the merchant terminal is going to take their fee from you, which could be 2.5 percentage points. The second thing is there are all kinds of ways that this can turn into fraud. So what I recommend you do is, if you have insurance companies doing that, by law they can't pay, they can't compel you to be paid that way. Just stop it. Tell them, no way, pay me by check or put the money in my account, but no more of this replenishing the credit card. As I say, you're paying 2.5% to the insurance company for absolutely nothing. So let's kill that one. I think there was one or two questions maybe that we wanted to bring out. Amber.
Oh, sorry, Dave. I had a question. Someone had asked, is it okay to use a triplicate receipt book for cash?
Of course it is. But what you have to remember about a receipt book is this. They sell them at Office Depot. So you can buy your receipt book. And if I'm a thief and I don't want to use your receipt book, I'll go get my own. Receipts aren't really the solution to the problem here. Okay. The real solution to the problem is you at the end of the day looking at your day end report and saying, okay, that patient was in, and did they pay? Did they pay their copay? You know, if our office policy is that we collect copays, then was it collected? And that's a far better safeguard. You know, that level of analysis, that cognizance of what happened today is far more important than fooling around with receipt books, because a receipt's just a piece of paper. And you know, if I want to give the patient a receipt that says $800 and have the duplicate and the triplicate in the receipt book say $1,000, I can make that happen. Okay, forgery is not hard. So great question, but I'm not sure that's gonna solve any problem for you. Remember that it's fine to make rules, but then your staff have to follow them. And if you have somebody who's an embezzler, they're not going to feel any particular compulsion to follow your rules.
Yep. Here's a question, Dave. When I've called for references, the only information I usually receive is confirmation of the dates of employment. Previous employers are hesitant to answer anything else because they cannot be certain that the person calling is not related to the former employee who is checking up on what is said about them, therefore opening themselves up to defamation of character. The only question I now ask is, would they hire them again? Sometimes even that isn't helpful. What specifically should you ask when checking references?
That is a fantastic question. The first thing I'd say is this: what I would offer the person at the other end is, look, I'm Dr. So-and-so. If you want to look up my number on Google and then call me back, I'm happy for you to do that. So let's eliminate the fear that the other side has that they're really talking to the applicant system. The other thing you can say to this person is, you understand that this person may be denied employment with me because you are not prepared to answer this question. Now, that's playing a little bit of hardball with the former employer. But what they're hearing in their mind is, okay, so if I don't answer these questions and this person doesn't get the job, they're going to sue me for not answering the questions, right? In other words, you can, you know, if somebody's scared about being sued, play into it. So I would do that. But that would you rehire question, and if somebody's reluctant to answer, what I would tell them is, you understand that I'm asking a question about your future plans. That can't be defamatory. Okay, so if you get stuck there, you have some things you can do. But yeah, you know, I reassure them or give them the means to confirm that they're actually talking with you and not the applicant's sister. And tell them that that's a safe question to answer. And furthermore, you know, tell them that if they don't answer it, it may result in this person not getting work. Just to refresh people on something we talked about before when we talked about hiring. A legitimate, without malice conversation between a former employer and a prospective employer can almost never be defamatory. Okay, you would really have to work at it to make that into defamation. And a lot of states actually make that conversation what's called subject to qualified privilege. So it's kind of in the same lines as a conversation you have with your attorney. It can't be compelled into court. So it's normally, again, as long as it's without malice, it's normally safe to give truthful information. No, it is always safe to give truthful information about a former employee. And answering the question, would you rehire this person, can't be true or false. I mean, there's no, that question is just not subject to a true-false test anyway. All right, well, guys, we are probably a little longer than we hoped, but Wendy's turtles were right on the money. We wanted to take some time today and, you know, give kind of thorough answers to some fantastic questions. So we hope this was valuable, informative, maybe even mildly entertaining for people. Next month, you're going to get to meet the $1 Million Club. So these are people who took more than $1 million from their practices. And they can teach us a lot about embezzlement. So we look forward to that. As was said at the outset, we're going to have some guests from Prosperity who were the lead investigators in these cases. So you'll get to hear in their own words what they dealt with. And it's Thursday, October 22nd next month. The tornadoes and I haven't decided if we're going to dress up in Halloween costumes or not, but we'll have that conversation. Amber said yes. We'll have that conversation next week. All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. Have a great night. Be safe, be well, and we'll see you in a little over a month.
Bye.
Bye.
Guys.
This concludes this episode of the Prosperident webinar series. The team will be back soon with more tools and ideas. If you have questions about this webinar, if you would like to discuss your practice with one of us, or if there is a topic you would like to see in a future webinar, we would love to hear from you. You can contact Prosperident through its website, www.prosperident.com, or by calling 888-398-2327.